Welcome. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to focus on your roles as faculty and developing yourselves in ways that undoubtedly your learners will appreciate. So thank you. I appreciate it. So today we're very fortunate to have Dr. Todd Zakrajek. That's what I'm going with now. Okay? Who is Associate Research Professor and Associate Director for Fellowship Programs in the Department of Family Medicine at UNC Chapel Hill. His current academic work and publications pertain to faculty development, effective instructional strategies, and student learning. He's written numerous articles and several books. As a matter of fact, there are going to be 2 books that we are going to raffle off to those who attended last night's sessions and today's sessions, so you too have a chance to read his fabulous books. They really are great reads. He may talk a little bit about them today. Dr. Zakrajek earned his bachelor's in psychology from Lake Superior State University and his MS and PhD from Ohio University in industrial and organizational psychology. Todd has been a visiting professor and delivered keynote addresses at over 200 institutions and conferences. I've heard him present several times before now, so I was excited to hear him last night. And I heard him last night and continue to be excited to hear him, was excited to hear him this morning, and it's going to change again this afternoon. So he just slices it up every time. Today he is going to help us all learn how to better apply cognitive learning theory to our own teaching practices. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Todd Zakrajek.
I like it here. All right. Thank you for the Diet Coke. If that is sipping Diet Coke, now I got a little more energy, so I'm gonna be okay, so I can talk a little bit faster. Yes. So here's the deal. I just want to start out by pointing out, and this is just for illustrative purposes only, because the stuff I'm going to be talking about. I did this book with Claire Major, who's at Alabama, and Michael Harris at SMU. It's 101 intentionally designed educational activities to put students on the path to success. This is kind of a manual for doing active and engaged learning. There's like 2 pages that would say, here's what a buzz group is, here's what the research says, here's how you do it, here's some applications, here's some ways of incorporating it with other ways. I want to let you know that that's there. Also wrote this book on dynamic lecturing with Christine Harrington, who's at Middlesex. And I did this one because I thought everybody's hating on the lecture. And the lecture itself isn't a problem. Bad lectures are a problem, and lecturing all the time is a problem. The reason I wanted to show these to you real quickly as my props is that as I'm talking, if somebody says, ooh, he really doesn't like active learning. No, I've written a whole book on it. I think it's phenomenal. Oh, he's kind of bashing lecture there. No, I think it's good. It's here. So the point is hitting both of those. The third book, which I don't have a copy with me, is The New Science of Learning, and it's actually written for students, college-level students, to rethink or to be mindful of the types of things that really impact their learning. Sleep, exercise, mindset, whether you have a fixed or growth mindset. And so with a book toward students, a book toward lecturing, and a book toward active learning, I'm trying to get across that there's lots of things we can do from a lot of different perspectives. That's the big thing I'm after. I want to leave some time for questions too. So I got about 40 minutes to really convince you of thinking about things a little differently, and then we'll move from there. So the quick question I have for you before I get to that one is, how many of you have ever heard the phrase, active learning is more effective than lecturing? Put your hands in the air if you've ever heard anything like this. Okay, cool. This is good. So I did see everybody's hands, so that's good. I want to ask you how many haven't heard it, because everybody just put your hands up. It is the most pervasive known thing in education right now. I don't understand what it means. And I would tell you, we could talk back and forth, but I can tell you right now, after we talked back and forth and explained it, you tried to explain it to me, unless you could do something that nobody's been able to do for the last 2 years, it's really hard to explain to me what it is, because I don't get it. See, I think that whole phrase is a mistake, and I would actually like to see it removed from education. Now, before you think I'm just a lone crackpot, I've got friends. I've actually been invited and gone to the Gates Foundation a couple times because once I started explaining this, they said, perhaps you should speak to the people who are giving out big chunks of money. I'm now working with the American Council of Education. Here's the thing I want to go with. Active learning is more effective than lecturing. If we're going to do a research project, first thing we need to do, what do we do first if we're going to do our research project on this? I'm going to run a study and find out if this thing's true. What is it?
Define our terms.
Got to define our terms. We've got to operationalize our variables, right? So active learning. If somebody could explain to me very, very quickly what active learning is, and you cannot use the words active or engaged, otherwise it's total tautology. You can't say to me, active learning is when students are active. Oh yeah, you know what running is? When people run. You know what driving a car is? When you get in a car and drive. So aside from active learning is actively learning, what is active learning? As opposed to not active learning. Anybody? So I could ask this one real quickly. Yes?
Providing exercises to increase the learning.
So if I provide exercises to increase the learning potential, that is active learning, or that's what leads to active learning? I think that would potentially lead to active learning. So I'll buy that providing exercises that could increase the learning potential, I think that that could provide for active learning, but I still don't know what active learning is. Yeah?
Interacting with concepts?
To interact with concepts. But couldn't you interact with concepts and still not learn anything?
Potentially.
Yeah, that's a problem then. So it really doesn't differentiate from being non-learning. It's just, I'm just interacting with concepts. So I could keep asking this one, but actually it becomes, so let's set this aside. Let's go to a different variable. Lecture. What do we mean by lecture?
Didactic.
We mean a didactic, right? You're talking to somebody, but am I lecturing right now? I think so, but then you're talking too. So maybe this isn't, I don't know what this one is. Would this be active learning, or is this didactic? Or is didactic sometimes active? All right, so this is where I started not sleeping for a while, because I'm hearing everybody tell me this. And then I got back and started doing a bunch of reading and seeing that in the 1990s we decided as an educational system we should move away from teaching and we should move toward learning. Have you heard this one? Yes. Away from teaching toward learning. Well, teaching is kind of synonymous with didactic, right? So that's teaching. This is lecturing, didactic. Learning is more like group work. Oh, cool. We should move away from lecturing and move toward group work. Why? Because this results in more learning. Well, now you're trying to explain to me that learning brings about more learning, because it's group learning, right? Group learning. Learning and learning focused. Learning brings about learning better than teaching does. That actually just sounds stupid. That's like you got apples and oranges and you say an apple is a better predictor of what an apple is than an orange is. Well, yeah, so learning is better when you're learning than when there's teaching. That seems ridiculous too. So now I get to this whole problem. So it turns out that I don't sleep much. So I started thinking about this in the sense that, well, maybe instead of conceptualizing the lecture as the didactic or as a continuous expository delivery of information, we should really look at what it means. And so in this one book, we have 12 types of lectures we pointed out in there. There's discussion lectures and problem-solving lectures and point-by-point lectures and more of a didactic expository lectures. There's naked lectures, which nobody's getting naked. That's Jose Bowen, and that's technology-free. So we have all these types of lectures. In the book, we talk about 12 different types of lectures. And then I also talk in this book about taking lectures and putting stuff with them, like discussion groups, or what we just were doing when you were defining what active learning was. Maybe that's not totally lecture, but maybe it's a lecture discussion. We didn't do a Socratic lecture because we all know that's bad. But I don't know if it is. So now, turns out I don't like anything. Makes life easy if you don't have to discriminate. I don't like anything. So that's what we started playing around with. So what I'm going to hit now was, maybe it's not about the lecture, maybe it's not about the active learning, maybe what we really should be focused on is just what brings about learning. Then we could start talking about variables in terms of things like, does attending to something facilitate the learning process? You know what? I could study that. That's an easier thing to study because I look at whether or not a stimulus catches your attention, I can measure that, and then whether or not you learn about it, and now I can find out whether or not attention leads to learning. Does understanding lead to learning? Does valuing something lead to learning? Those things I could measure. This other stuff, we got some problems we'll play around with here. So lecturing's been around for about 1,000 years. It hasn't really changed that much. Still got the eager people up front, got your side talkers in the back, got your sleeper. It's hard to explain why, but you got your texting dude. But people have been looking at this for a while and saying, look, we got sleepers and side talkers. We should get rid of the lecture. And that's a big deal right now. Everybody's hating on the lecture. The problem I have, though, is there's still people who do learn from the lecture. In fact, I got a daughter who says she's a senior philosophy major at UNC Chapel Hill. Primary preferred way of learning is a lecture. She reads her books ahead of time. She then takes notes on the books, leaves a gap, comes into the class. The instructor lectures. She writes down notes to augment the notes that she already took. And then she also notes what he finds interesting and why he finds it interesting. She looks at how she's basically modeling thinking for her. And anybody in here who says, well, yeah, but she's a really strange child, that's a given. Or maybe he's just a phenomenally good lecturer. So I don't know. And even if he is a phenomenally good lecturer, maybe we have a problem with what learning's really happening. So, we're going to play around with this. Oh, what happened? It's top. Curious. Oh yeah, make it faster. Not necessary. All right, so we've got these people. So we got to think about what's good and bad about this one. There's a meta-analysis done by Scott Freeman. This thing's been out of Science. This thing's been downloaded like 300,000 times. It's from the National Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. It's 5 pages long. You know what's cool about that? It's 5 pages long and almost nobody has read it, but not most, but a lot of people have taken the conclusion section and written about it. You know how this works, right? You don't have to read the whole article, you just read the conclusion, and the title, the abstract, the conclusion, and then include it in your writing. It works out really well. It saves you so much time reading through all of the stuff about procedures and methods and participants and data, and don't need that anyway. And so what happens in the end here, okay, if you didn't catch that as a joke, that's a joke. You don't have to laugh, but I just suddenly realized that sarcasm is the worst thing to do in a presentation. So I was being sarcastic, don't cut right to the conclusion. But what happens in the conclusion, the authors said that basically what they boil down to is, if we were doing a medical study, so they were looking at active and engaged learning versus lecturing, if this were a medical study, it would be stopped for effect. There is no reason to look anymore to see if engaged learning is better than lecturing. It's always better. My head, learning is always better than teaching at getting people to learn. Still got that going. Here's the problem though. The differentiation of lecture versus active and engaged learning. Lecturing is continuous expository delivery of information, whole all the time talking. Everything else is engaged learning. What I've been doing here this far, if we just stopped, we wouldn't go in the lecture category, we'd go in the engaged learning category because I'd ask you a question and you had responded. You could have up to 95% lecture, 5% activity. It goes in the engaged learning category. So now when somebody says engaged learning, remember that everybody heard active learning is more effective than lecturing? Keep in mind that when we define the variables, active learning means as long as there's any activity. If I have a 50-minute class period or a 50-minute session and I do 25 minutes of a lecture, I ask you, what do you think about this? And then I go back to another 20 minutes of lecture and I have 5 minutes of discussion in the middle. That's not a lecture anymore, it's active learning. So now when somebody says active learning is better, it's not really what they're saying. Lecturing with some activities is better than lecturing all the time. That's the study that's out there. The problem is people read summaries and they say active learning good, lecturing bad. In fact, this bad. The impression I get, it's almost unethical to be lecturing if you have this data. Oh, could anybody take this to an extreme? Because maybe they didn't even read Scott's study. Maybe what they do is read Eric's thing from Science and then they do this. That's a brilliant, see, darn, sarcasm again. I think I'm just in a bad mood. This is not a good idea, at least from my perspective. Lecture does, there is research, lecture has its place, And what I want to get at now, real quickly, I'm trying to build fairly quickly here, is we got to be careful looking at something. This is obviously like lectures are bad and we have to quit doing them. Team-based learning is good, we should do that. Flipped classroom is good, we should do that. And when we do that, basically what we're saying is that there's strategies that are good and strategies that are bad, and we should do the good ones and not the bad ones. But the problem is there's good ways of doing these. They've gotten lumped into these categories. Oh, by the way, I just have to throw this in here because if everybody's hating on the lecture, we all have said that group work is good, right? So I found this. I suspect this is the best data I've ever found. It came from Endless Origami. All right. Trust no one. You're supposed to learn teamwork, but you don't. And then I found this that I thought was very convincing. It's a clever play on words, isn't it? When people find out that there's a group project, do you ever notice how learners are universally so excited to be involved in group work? And no. Over and over and over again, we get people who say, oh man, I hate working in groups. Now, some of them love it, some don't. It actually turns out, by the way, do you know how to tell the difference? I can predict the difference. If people are taught how to work in groups, they tend to like working in groups. If they're just assigned to work in groups without being taught how to work in groups, they tend not to like working in groups. Crazy. We could actually change the whole field of higher education where people tend to not like working in groups by teaching them how to work in groups. Try this real quickly. 3 things. If you're going to assign group work to a group of medical students, just pick randomly. You're going to do it. You're doing a block and you decide I want the medical students to work in small groups and they're going to work for, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks on something, 2 or 3 weeks on something, and then they're going to report out to the rest of the group very quickly on this topic. We could have a group of residents do this. 4 residents getting together. You got, what, 18, 17 residents, whatever number of residents you got, we're going to put them in small groups, they're going to work together, and then we're going to do this. Okay, if we do that, what are like 3 problems we know the group is going to have? You know right now there's going to be these 3 problems. What would those be? Leadership. There's going to be a problem with who's the leader within the group. And fighting for leadership, or maybe nobody assumes leadership. So there's one of them. What else are they going to have? Time management. Nobody has any extra time, so they're going to have a terrible time finding a time to meet and managing the time within the group. What's one more thing?
Equity.
Equity. Equity, what part of equity?
One person's going to end up doing most of it because they're the one.
Yeah, we got one person doing most of the work. We got our hogs and our logs, right? So that's going to happen in there. Now, if we know that these 3 things, the leadership and the time and the equity and those things are going to be a problem, when we assign groups, we could take a little bit of time and just say, hey, y'all, you're going to have a problem with time management. So here's an article, just a real quick article for you. Here's how you use Doodle Poll to schedule the time, and here's how you do this stuff. Oh, equity is going to be an issue. Here's some things within equity you got to pay attention to. If we do that, people actually get better at working in groups. If we just say, go do it, they tend not to get better. And then some of them become department chairs, so you got to be really careful. Teach them how to work in groups. All right, so we want that. So now the next question for you. If we're going to really work through this one, I got to have you do one more thing. And this time, I'm going to set a timer so I don't go over here in this particular activity. I'm going to give you 45 seconds to do this activity. So you got to identify who you're going to work with, 2 or 3 people in your neighborhood there. All right, got your beeps? Because there's no, once I click this up here, 45 seconds, it's going to go fast. All right, here we go. Your first response to this is going to be, this is stupid. Let that go. I'm already telling you, I understand that's going to be your first response. And then fight through that and take your 45 seconds and pick the most effective and least effective, okay? Sail right past the stupid part. Most effective, least effective. You can do this. I believe in you. On your mark, I'm going to click the button. Get set, go. 45 seconds.
He's gonna have one,
All right. That was like 52 seconds. Let's see what you came up with. All right, when I said this is stupid, because obviously, first one is it totally depends, right? So I didn't want you to spend any time saying, well, this is ridiculous, it totally depends. So then I already told you, that's out of the gate, totally depends. Once it totally depends, though, what tools would you pick? Just a couple. What are your favorites? Did you settle on one?
Hammers.
Hammers, okay. Hammer's one. How many of you picked hammer? Right, a few of you? Okay, anybody not pick a hammer? All right, what did you all pick for yours?
Pick for pliers.
Pliers. There you go. Pliers are a good effective tool. Anything else?
It's a vice grip, but you can hammer with it.
Excellent. Vice grip. And I'm very, very happy that you picked a vice grip, because yesterday one of the groups picked pliers. Why would you take pliers if a vice grip is available? I mean, it does everything that pliers does do, and it's got physics. Well, I mean, pliers do too, but they don't clamp down. Okay, so there you go. You picked them. Anybody pick a least effective one?
Drill bit.
The drill bit. Oh, this is good. If we can separate things out, I wasn't really clear, but yeah, if we could take something, either the screwdriver head or the sockets, without the handles. I mean, if you got a socket with no handle, you just fit it over the nut and you'd say, well, there it is. I mean, there's not much you can do. Same thing with a screwdriver. So those would be least effective. As we were chatting over here, it just suddenly occurred to me, and I've been doing this for about a year, and I never thought if there's a disciplinary expertise level of differentiation here. Like, would the surgeons ever take this X-Acto knife? And would the, I don't know who take, the hammers, everybody. So, yeah. All right, so here's the thing. I took a total of about 2 minutes on this whole activity, and here's why. When it comes to teaching, you all have your favorite tool. We do have to keep in mind, when is it most effective? It depends. But I'm stunned at how infrequent we switch our educational strategies based on what we're facing. If a person really likes team-based learning, they say, oh, team-based learning, that's where it's at. Yeah, for most students under a lot of circumstances, but not always. Least effective, there's some things that are out there we stay away from. At least we perceive them to be ineffective, so why would we use them? So the point here is that it's different tools for different scenarios, but we do have our go-tos. So I think that combination is really important. And I wanted to do it with tools because it makes more sense to start with tools, but if we did it for here too, if I said which is the most effective and which is the least effective, there are folks, if I started with this slide, who would say, oh, flipped classroom's very effective, lecture's not effective, team-based learning effective, online's not effective. And that's what I wanted you to start to see. That would be a mistake. Online education can be phenomenally good, and it can be terrible. And by the way, I didn't mention this last group too, is I just thought about this the other day, is a friend of mine wrote a book on communities of inquiry, which is looking at online environments. And there's one line, I'm reading through the book, everything's going really well in terms of I like this. And there's a sentence in there that's something like, it is possible to have as good of community or as strong a community in a face-to-face course as there is in an online course, but you have to work at it, if you work at it enough. And I stopped, read it again. It's possible to be as good a community in face-to-face as there is in online if you work at it. And then I called Norm, one of the authors, said, Norm, I think something got through your editing process here. Isn't this backwards? And he then explained to me, no. He says it's very easy to get a community, build a feel in an online course. It takes more work when you're face-to-face because there's a lot of other stuff that gets involved. And so we talked through that for a while. But it really started to change my mind on what really was going on with online communities. So again, it depends, totally depends. If it totally depends, oh dang it, forgot this piece, this is important too. This was Richard Haig, 6,000 data points here. Each one of these is a course, an entire course, not a single subject. So there's 6,000 students in here. They're high school, college, and university. Same thing I already told you though. Traditional here means didactic, expository, just delivering information the entire time. And interactive is anytime there's some activity involved. So again, you start to look at this a little bit more suspiciously, but a lot of people, like 15 minutes ago if I had you look at this, a lot of people looked at this and said, wow, so this is the pretest score, post-test minus the pretest is the gain. If your whole class scored 80 on the pretest and 100 on the post-test, there'd be a 20-point gain. So this line here is the maximum you can get. That'd be 100% on the exit exam, essentially. Higher is better. So when I first saw this, I went with what everybody else did. Look, interactive is good, lecture is bad. Very clearly, by the way. I know there's a couple of interactives down here, but boy, that is real clear data that all the lectures down here. Then when I started reading more carefully and finding out that you could have 95% lecture and 5% engagement and still be in this category, this all gets kind of muddled. This becomes lecture with activity, and this is lecture alone. And then the part that bothered me is with really good lectures, why wouldn't we have a couple of groups up here? And I was thinking there must be something that prohibits a group from gaining a certain amount if you're lecturing all the time. So hold on to that, I'll come right back to it. But the more important thing is this is not lecture versus activity, this is lecture all the time versus lecture and activity. The big problem is I can't come up with a clever title like the flipped classroom, which is a great clever title, for continuous expository delivery of didactic information. That's never going to catch on with anybody. So I got to come up with a word for that. Talking always, that doesn't work either. We'll figure it out someday. So here's the deal. If it totally depends, sometimes lecture's good, sometimes not, sometimes online's good, sometimes not, sometimes team-based is good, sometimes not. This demonstrates that when you do add people, it gets better, but I want to know why. And why can't some of the lectures be up in here? I got to know that one. And then I also want to know why storytelling works so well. Just as a side note, I'm throwing that in. Because nobody can argue about storytelling being an effective way of learning. And unfortunately, storytelling is also a type of lecture. So if I tell you a story that's a 15-minute story, you've just been lectured in a story format. So it's a lecture, but lectures aren't effective. The storytelling is. So why? So then the question becomes, why is that effective? And then I started playing around with some models. Not this one. I found this on the web when I typed in complicated view of cognitive learning. Popped right up. This is how complicated it could be. But as I'm looking at this, and I'm just curious about it, I'm just curious, because it does list all the stuff. It starts over here, and it kind of comes up through here, and then it goes to here, cognitive load, then it comes down here into the sensory and working memory and long-term memory, and then from there we get all this other stuff, and all this stuff kind of feeds off from that, but it starts here and goes through that. So let's start there, cognitive load. Now, if I'm not careful, by the way, here's a little teaching tip for you. If you put something on the screen with words on it, people will read it. If I put that up there and start talking, then you would read that while I'm talking. If I explain why cognitive load is important, about the time you get to the last line, I'd be saying, and that's why it's so imperative. And then you'd say, oh, dang it, I was doing something else. So the concept is I gotta block this out. If you don't have the little clicker with you, if you're teaching from over here, all you have to do is hit the B key. B blacks it out, any key brings it back. If you really want to, you could hit the W key, which will take it to a white screen, and then come back. We'll get there. That and a barbecue sandwich, price of admission, covered. Now, this cognitive load theory. If sensory memory is all the sensations coming into the human being and I have to process all this stuff, then it goes into a working memory. Working memory is I decide what do I care about and what do I not care about. Then it goes into a long-term memory, which I store this stuff, and we can store so much stuff in long-term memory. And if I need it, I pull it back out, comes back into working memory. I think about it, I take some more stuff here, I restore it back into here again. So the dance goes back and forth between sensory, working memory, sensory's over there, working memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory can accept whatever our sensory systems can handle. I could look at a whole football stadium and close my eyes, and for a quarter of a second, it's there. Quarter second later, it's gone. Touch somebody's skin, you feel it for a few seconds afterwards. Echoic memory. Do you ever catch yourself when somebody says something to you that surprises you, you say what really fast, almost instinctively, they start to repeat it, and then you realize you actually knew what they said. That's because the verbiage catches you off guard. You say what fast, but echoic memory actually has a representation of what they said. So as they repeat it, you think, no, I got it, I understand now. That's in there for about 2 seconds, 2 to 4 seconds. Now, that's all over there. Long-term memory, store tons of stuff over there. This one, you can only handle certain amounts. If you max it out, it closes down on you, just like an expressway. Too many cars out there, get in an accident, it all shuts down. Our job as educators is to keep the working memory working. Cognitive load is what shuts it down. If you have too much cognitive load. So, intrinsic load. Some things are just hard. It's hard to learn. If you pick up an article that's a really tough article to read, it's just work. One of the things I think that we have learners coming along now who don't understand the fact that learning should make you tired. Learning is exhausting. If we did this all day long, you would go home and say, whew, I am tired. If you go to the beach and sit in an Adirondack chair, well, you gotta have the canopy thing because otherwise you're in the sun and you got melatonin releasing later and all that other stuff. The point is, if you've gotten a shade and you're just relaxing at the end of the day, you may not feel exhausted. Learning's hard work. That we can't do anything about that one. Extraneous load. Extraneous load is anything else that comes into play that doesn't facilitate learning. It burns cognitive energy, but it doesn't help the learning process. I'll come back to examples in just a second. I want to do all three of them examples. Germane load. Germane load is when you first get exposed to something, it's a lot of work, but then as you process of information, how you process it, the more frequently you do something, the easier that neuronal pathway is to fire. And if you do it enough, it becomes automatic. When you get into your car, you could get into your car and start to drive and not even think about it. One day, I worked way too many hours. I woke up really early on Saturday morning and I thought, I got papers to grade, I've got a new curriculum to develop, I'm gonna make pancakes for my kids first though. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning. So I'm gonna run over to the store, grab some supplies, come back, make breakfast, and then I'll go to work. I'll do this. Jump in my car. Next thing you know, I'm sitting there thinking, dang, I'm at work. I didn't want to be here. I just drove to work. If anybody in here has ever dialed 9 to get out of your home phone, it means you're making too many calls at the office. So this is automaticity. I pick up a phone, hit a 9. Oh, I'm home. Now, no, don't do it. So then you have to hover over the 1 and then you go. So the point here is that's automaticity. That frees up cognitive load. And then you have schema, activation of schema. You have so many schemas. When you walk into a restaurant, you kind of know what to do. I've suggested before it'd be kind of fun to go into a McDonald's with a friend and go in there and sit down and wait about 5 minutes and say, service in here is awful, let's leave. See? Because the McDonald's are not going to serve you. If you go to a Ruth Chris Steakhouse and step up to the hostess stand and say, I will take a T-bone and some asparagus and garlic mashed potatoes. Aside from, they're not going to throw you out, what do they think is going on right now? If they're at a hostess stand and you step up to a restaurant where there is seating, what do they think you want? Is what?
Carry out.
Carry out. If you step up to a hostess stand and just say, I would like something, name a food, it's like, oh, you want to carry out? Let me get you a menu. There's a schema in their head that if you step up and start to order, you must want carry out. If you walk into a McDonald's, you must have to order at the counter. So the point is we have schemas. We have a schema for this room. When you come in, you just look at the room. When it was empty, nobody in here, you could come in and if you like to sit toward the front, you sit up here. If you like to sit in the back, you sit back there. If I walked to the back of the room and said, everybody turn your chairs around, I was just tricking you. Now the back people are in the front. Ha ha ha. I mean, I just messed with your schema. So, here's what's important. If you activate a schema, it makes learning way easier. You all do this all the time. When you say to a resident or to a med student, it's like this. That's what you're doing. You're saying, oh, this procedure, it's a lot like the injections I showed you last week, except this time we're going to use a different gauge needle, we're going to come in from a different angle. But as soon as you say it's a lot like the injection from last week, you're activating that schema from last week. That means the more schemas you have, the easier it is to learn. The easier it is to learn, the more schemas you can build, which means learning is not linear at all, it's curvilinear. As I start to build more and more schemas, then all of a sudden I'm really getting stuff easier and easier. You can pick up an article now and read it in 15 minutes, hand it to me and say, Todd, there's some good stuff in here, I want you to read this. Just skim it for the major points. You read it in 15 minutes, I take an hour and a half, I come back and I don't have the major points. And you say, need to focus more on the major issues. Yeah, you're talking like an expert now. A novice, I don't know. I like H&P. Your H&P is a little bit long. You know what, just focus on the really important things. If I knew what the really important things were, I would focus on those. So instead what I'm going to do is tell you everything so you don't yell at me for leaving out the important things. It's easier to regurgitate everything. You know, when they were 4 years old, they stubbed their toe, and I'm thinking that that's why they're in here with abdominal cramps. No, it's not. So the point is we have to get to a point where we know it's important. That's building up schema and automating our systems. Cognitive load. Here we go. If I max out your cognitive load, you can't do multiple things. You have to shut down something. So if you're driving along and everything is great and all of a sudden the car slips a little bit because it's been raining, but it's also about 32 degrees outside, and you feel the car slip just a little bit. A lot of people do that situation. You got kids arguing in the back seat. You got the radio blaring. You turn off the radio. You tell the kids, excuse me, children, but it's a little slippery. Might you just quiet down a little bit? Should be funny as that. Wow, you people are mean to your kids. So then you're going to focus, because what's happened there is that's too much cognitive load. If I've never driven before or only driven a few times, we all know this when you have kids driving, right? If you've got kids starting to drive and it's raining heavy, you say, not today, it's too rainy. What you're actually saying is, with the added rain and the complexity of driving, that's too much cognitive load. You can drive during the daylight without your friends and no radio on. What you're doing is setting the cognitive load there. Once you get better and better at it, you can open up. And this is why the human brain is so cool. The automaticity of things in our lives allow us to do additional things. Extraneous load? To think about this for a second. What things could I bring into a learning situation? I'll just ask you here. You're teaching me a procedure now. What types of things in my environment could just be extraneous load? That's extra cognitive draw with no benefits.
Music.
Yes. If you're playing music, and keep in mind that if you're an expert and you have automaticity down, you might be bored. If you're bored and you say, you know, I'm going to play some music because it gets boring in here. I'm brand new at this. The music is extraneous load. Others?
Cell phones.
Cell phones. Excuse me. Excellent. There's studies out that just having a cell phone next to you, even if it's turned off, adds cognitive load to the point that on a heavy, complex task, scores go down. Easy tasks, they don't go down. So having a cell phone around during complicated things, we know it adds cognitive load. All right, a couple more. We'll just do two more.
Multiple observers.
Yeah, having extra observers around, that's always extra cognitive load, because I'm mindful of who's watching me, which is drawing some of my cognitive energy. So those people. One more.
Extraneous conversation.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Extraneous conversation. You're teaching me a procedure, and while you teach it, you say, I think you're doing well. I'll step over right here. This part here is really easy. Let me know if you have any issues with it. And then I start talking to somebody else about something else. This is the first time I'm doing it. I'm really focusing, but I still want to know whether you're talking about me, or maybe you're just talking about something in general, and that's enough. So I'll throw in a couple more. So those are all really good. You start doing the procedure, and then you explain to the person about a time when you did the procedure and things went differently, or the first time you know, this reminds me of the first time I did this. That injection, by the way, make sure the angle comes, yep, that's good. And you are hitting a spot now that's as big as a pencil eraser, so you'll want to really focus. I remember when I first did it, boy, I missed that spot, and it was ugly. Right into the bone, that was bad. Oh, yep, a little more of an angle. That's a lot of extraneous load going on there. Now, guiding somebody by saying, hey, drop the angle a little bit, that's not extraneous load, that's direct instruction. So we have to be careful. However, activating a schema is going to reduce load. So if you're starting to give an injection for a knee joint, and you say, okay, it's going to be a lot like the shoulder, except while the needle's going in, that's helpful. Remember when you did the shoulder, now be careful with this part of it, that's helpful. Oh, by the way, if you ever run across a person who, now's not the time. So that point of schemas can be helpful, but if you don't know what the schema is, it's actually extraneous load. That brings up one other part of education that's incredible. I could give you a schema, and if you get it and you don't, you benefit and you're extraneous load. It's not that you break even, it's harder for you and then easier for you for the baseline. Quick example I love to use. Sometimes if you have a lot of activity in a classroom, you're trying to get everybody back in order, or if you got, the whole big medical school class is going on to make a lot of noise and they're doing small group activities, you want to get their attention, a good distinct sound is helpful. It could be a tambourine, could be a train whistle, or it could be a cowbell, because sometimes in education, all you need is...
Or cowbell.
Excellent, more cowbell. How many of you know that reference? I want to try something. Put your hands up if you know the reference. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many don't know the reference? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. See, that's awful. Y'all just need to get up with it. So here's the deal. If you do know the reference, by the way, the reference Christopher Walken in a Saturday Night Live skit, and oh my gosh, what's the name of the song now? It's what? Dreamer?
Fear the Reaper.
Fear the Reaper. Yeah, Fear the Reaper. And in the song, Christopher Walken comes out as the music producer, and the band is complaining because he's hitting the cowbell too much. And Christopher Walken says, it's like, I got a fever, and the only prescription is more cowbell. Now, here's the deal. All I have to do is mention the cowbell. There's some people who say, oh yeah, distinct sound, got it. And the next time you do a large group thing, you might be thinking, I've got 180 students. I'm going to put them into small groups. That is going to be loud. I better take something. I think I'll take I got a little whistle that I'm going to take, and I'm going to do that. So you're using the schema to help you with the process. If I use a schema and you don't know what it is, and those of you who said, I don't know the reference of the cowbell, your next statement could be in a classroom situation. Is that going to be on the test? Because if you're asking if it's going to be on a test, what you're wondering is, you've used an example. I wonder if the example might show up on the test. And if so, not only was it not helpful here, but I've got to go learn that. Or if I don't ask the question, I might go learn that just to be sure. So you telling a side story, you telling a quip, you showing something, if it helps some people, hurts other people, just please keep that in mind. If Sam is sitting here and Sam's really struggling and somebody comes to you and says, Bob, Sam seems really struggling, you say, yeah, I don't know what the deal is. Everybody else seems to be getting it. I don't know why Sam's not getting the same stuff as everybody else. If Sam's background isn't the same as other people, you might be using schemas that are helping everybody else and hurting Sam. It's like when you drive a car. If Sam's never driven a car before, that's a problem. It's like if you come from an impoverished environment, you never get to travel, and you're stuck in a local occasion. It's the tension that builds up. Sam might say, oh yeah, I got that one. The family that went to Europe every summer doesn't understand that feeling. So our education sometimes isn't as equitable as we think it is. So our job is to really try to max out this cognitive load, not max it out, be mindful of the cognitive load so that people can keep learning. Now, that's the biggest point I wanted to make today. The other part I did want to hit there real quickly. Oh, darn, did it again. Let's get so excited to get to the next piece. Multitasking, y'all know that people, about multitasking, right? People are good at multitasking, actually? Oh, really? Oh, you've gone the wrong way on this one. Dang. Everybody can multitask. Everybody can multitask, though. We're all multitaskers. If we make a statement that people can't multitask, think about how many things in your life you'd have to do only that thing. If I'm driving in the car and you say, oh, Todd, I got a question. Wait a minute. Yes? See, I have to pull over. That was my description of pulling over. Watch, maybe an illustrative purpose will help. Oh, let's do this one first. Watch this. I'm multitasking. You see it? That's so cool. I'm walking and talking at the same time. Those of you who say, well, that's not really multitasking, it really is. Walking is a task. Someone loses mobility, you know how hard it is to get back. In fact, it took me years to even acquire this skill. Then I've been practicing it most of my life. By the way, do you ever notice that when you look across a football stadium and see a shadow of a person walking, you can tell if it's a significant other? We all walk slightly different. That's because the neurons fire away. That makes sense. When I start walking, I use this example so much now I'm kind of self-conscious about it. I seem to always start with my left foot whenever I start walking. I don't know why, I just do. The really strange thing about this is that my right sole wears out on the ball of my foot faster than the left shoe does. That's because when I turn on my right foot, but I start with my left foot. The reason I mention that? Automaticity. It's just what I do. But because it's automaticity, I just do it and don't think about it. When does multitasking not work? Now you don't have to worry about just saying it does work, doesn't work. It doesn't work when you max out cognitive load. You ever seen this little gig? Lost my cell phone.
It's right here.
Oh, thanks. This is one of my favorite ones. This is one my daughter yells at. Every time we go to New York City, Times Square, she yells at me for this one. That's task shifting. See, I can't multitask in a way that I would look at my phone and keep walking at the same speed. Because I can't do both of those things at the same time, I decrease one of the tasks. That's task shifting. If I toss something in the air, watch this. I can walk and talk and toss. Walk, walk, walk. See, I just did it. As soon as I said wall and stopped talking and I actually stopped walking, that was a task shift because I lost track of tossing this in the air. So we do this all the time. Here's the thing that learners don't seem to get though. We task shift away from multitasking without cognitively being aware of it. So then I'm doing it and not know I'm doing it. So I think I'm multitasking and I'm not, which is why many of you would say, nope, they can't multitask. They can't multitask the way they think they can. They can drive a car and carry on a conversation. They can read a newspaper and hum. Those things can happen. But what I can't do is text my friend and listen to you at exactly the same time because those are both cognitively demanding tasks. So then I shift. And task shifting is I text a little, I listen a little, text a little, listen a little. It's all good as long as you have recursive language and keep repeating things. But as soon as you have a critical point in there that you don't repeat, like if you're explaining something to me about a patient and I know most of it and I'm listening and you want to make sure I get it so you're repeating yourself a little bit, then all of a sudden you say, but never, ever, and I'm texting, but never, ever, and I'm texting during that time so I don't hear that part, and then I stop just as you say, insert the needle at this angle. What I heard was example, 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 insert the needle at this angle. And all I missed was never do this. So that's the danger of texting and listening at the same time. The other cool part is most people, if you really pay attention, you can tell right when they quit listening to you. And then I'm just telling you, play with them. It's hilarious. If I have somebody, I have a resident who I'm talking to and they're saying, yeah, and I say, hey, on Friday, do you want to meet? We can go over the stuff you've been talking about. Sure, that sounds great. Okay, where do you want to meet? How about we meet in your office? At this point, they're okay. They've been shifting back, because these are micro shifts. I'd listen to you say, do you want to meet? I haven't heard a time yet, your office, and then I could be texting someone and say, oh, by the way, what time? And I'd say noon. They'd say, okay, cool, noon, your office, Friday, it's all good. That all worked out. So that's all good, except while you're texting, you're not listening to the other part. But at that point, if I say, okay, yeah, when we get together, it'd be great if we talk a little bit about cognitive load. Cognitive load, got it. Yes, because when you come to my office on Friday, I think, I'll have a hand up. This is all, nobody cares, nobody cares, nobody cares, nobody cares. And then that's where texting comes from. Then you text, oh, you don't care, and then they listen a little bit. Oh, still don't care. No, still don't care. And so that comes back and forth. If they're doing that to you, though, just stop talking. The extent to which they're buried in thought, the cognitive load, the intrinsic load of their text, will be immediately evident by the length of time it takes them to realize you've stopped talking. And I have actually gone as long as 10 seconds. Imagine, we're having a conversation just like this, and you're texting, and I'm talking, texting, talking, texting, talking, texting, and I'm going to count it out in my head, but watch how long this is. Okay, so I was thinking Friday might be good. Yeah, that's all. Friday's great. We're back and forth, and I go, okay, well. That's 10 seconds. The person said, what? Oh, yeah, Friday, right? It's like, yeah, you know what? You need to listen a little bit more. So it's just the point we have to be careful with that. Task shifting, that's good. So here's the last piece I want to do very, very quickly. Now, pulling it all together. If cognitive load is a critical component, we want to know why storytelling is good, why is flipped classroom good, what's going on there. There's just a couple of components in there that I really want to make sure we hit. Number one, you have to have the person's attention. And all I'm going to do is come back to reiterate what we've already said. Done here. Sensory memory gathers the information. If you're not gathering information, that's what attention is, learning can't happen. We've got to have attention for learning to happen. Number two, there has to be some understanding. When you gather the attention from your sensory memory, if I don't know what it is, I just let it go. Number three is value. There has to be some value, or why would I pay attention to it? I was at a conference recently, I've been using this example. At the conference, a red lotus pulls up during a break. People are outside, ooh, it's a lotus. We go back inside, and I was running a session. I said, anybody out there see the lotus? Yep. Also, what color was it? Red. Oh, red was beautiful. What was the color of the car right in front of it? I don't know. Was there a car right in front of it? What about the car right behind it? Nope. Whole group, no clue. Car in front, car back, but they knew the lotus. It drew their interest. It was the thing of interest, and just being presented with the other stuff doesn't matter. You have to have some interest. Then, I'm just going to tell you the last two here. There's got to also be repetition. Repetition is how we keep things in our head. We have to go through and repeat it periodically, or our brain actually prunes those connections and they're gone. Repetition and elaboration. All elaboration is activating those schemas. If I can tie stuff to other things, tie it to schemas, tie it to knowledge I know, it sticks with me. If I have attention, understanding, and value at any given moment, a chance to practice a couple times, and ways to tie it to other things, learning will happen. So now we can come back to why is storytelling so effective? If you think about storytelling, attention, understanding, stories are built for understanding. Value, that's your moral of the story. Repetition, you typically will hear, they don't tell the stories once, you tell it through the generations. This is like my father has told me, I have heard the story hundreds of times. Elaboration ties into other things. A story will naturally tie into other things. Storytelling works not because it works, that's a tautology. It works because it has these critical components, and it will work as long as your cognitive load is not maxed out. If your cognitive load's maxed out, I can't hear the story. Cool. Flipped classroom, does it work? Yes, under that circumstance. Lecture, does it work? Yep, under this circumstance. Take just a second as we finish with the lecture. The lecture, I can start with your attention. If I'm an expert and you're a novice, I may outstrip your understanding pretty quickly. I have to be very careful about the understanding. Value. I might see the value, you might not see the value. Repetition, not really a chance for you to practice this in any way. And elaboration, well, if I give you some examples, you could tie those in, which is good. But if I don't give you examples, because I got a lot to cover and just I fire out the material to you, then it really doesn't have that. So a lecture has some problems with it. How could we help that? Well, I could lecture for only about 10 minutes, which isn't going to max out your cognitive load. I can hold your attention and probably not go past your understanding. I could tell you why it's important. Then I could have you talk to your neighbors. And while you're talking to your neighbors, repetition is going to happen because that's a teach back, you're explaining it. And elaboration is if your neighbor says, oh, well, and I think about it like this. So now I've added an activity which helps me with these components that the lecture itself struggles with. So a lecture with those components is way better than a lecture by itself. Also, there's the understanding part. That's all about how you lecture, the attention part. I have to do this one because I got just a second, and this is my favorite thing to do ever. I'll tell you about classical conditioning. See, classical conditioning is when you have a naturally occurring phenomenon, like some stimulus will happen and then there's a response. And what's really amazing is you can take a neutral stimulus and pair it with that unconditioned stimulus, and that neutral stimulus will come to elicit a response that's similar to, but not identical to, the unconditioned response. And then you can take a new neutral stimulus and pair that new neutral stimulus with the conditioned stimulus, and that condition, I'll stop there. 27 seconds, congratulations, you made it almost a half a minute. This is a type of a lecture with me reducing all kinds of visual cues. I drop my affect. The brain habituates and will kind of shut down constant stimuli. As long as I keep my pacing, my reflection constant, stay here so you don't see me wandering around, your brain should fight to stay awake after about 20 or 30 seconds. 27 to be exact. But I've spent 50 minutes out here saying, and then, so that's different. So we can, lectures are totally different. Okay. I'm all excited about this because now if somebody says, ooh, active learning is more effective than lecturing, hopefully we would look at that person and say, not sure what you mean by that. And then when they say, oh, you know, like active learning when you're active. And then you can say, oh, like lecturing when you lecture. And they'll say, yes, exactly. And you walk away with that smug feeling that you are smart and they are not. That's how I live my life. That and spite. I'm driven by spite. I'll just all right, so hopefully it's a different way of looking at it. So when somebody does say, hey, this is an effective teaching strategy, in your head you're thinking, okay, the name of the teaching strategy helps me understand how you're doing it. We still have to figure out if it's effective. If I tell you I'm teaching a flipped classroom, you got a sense of what I'm doing, you still don't know if it's effective. If I tell you I'm using team-based learning, you know what I'm doing, now we have to think about if it's effective. But the names do help because they're nomenclature. They help you understand what I'm doing. Thank goodness comes from these other things. All right. I've almost never in my life stopped before the end of a presentation, but today I managed for a couple of minutes early. We do have a couple of minutes. If someone has a burning question, they can ask it. If not, we're just going to sit here for 3 or 4 minutes and relax. Nobody's leaving yet. And I say that because if you've ever at the end of a class period said, does anybody have any questions? What you're really stating is, would somebody like to say something that's going to keep everyone else from leaving? But if you're not leaving, nobody's hindering anything. You're just asking. See how sneaky that is, psychologically speaking? All right, any questions about cognitive load stuff? Yes?
So, when I have sat in on some lectures in the medical school, I can see students going online to sites that are not educational.
Yes.
So that's similar to the cell phone activity. When I'm standing in front of the computers, I can't tell what websites the students are on. So you talk about pausing when somebody is texting until you catch their attention again. But what are your thoughts about students who are distracted by their computer screens? And in the lecture format, I don't know that the quiet is related to whether it's the computer or whether it's being played in my lecture.
Yeah, so you've opened up one of the huge problems we have. Well, actually, it's the second big problem. The first one is getting them into the seats, because they just don't come. Then when they do come, do they actually do what they're supposed to? And I think you also have to have more of an open mind, because there's a lot of shoes that need to be bought. I just love it when the students are in class buying stuff. It's like, what am I gonna? So, number one, if you pay attention, you can kind of get a sense for some students whether they're doing academically related stuff or not. And that's what's tricky is the brain's going to go to the most interesting thing around, and that's why these are insidious things. It used to be when I was younger, there wasn't much interesting things around, but now there's a lot of interesting stuff because the whole world is right here. So that's a tricky one. If they are shopping or something, they'll watch them a little bit. My screen can be open like this. And I had a student one time that I said, look, you got to quit shopping during class. And she looked, she said, I was not shopping, I was taking notes. I said, wow, you were saying that with an emphatic tone. She said, yeah, I don't like to be accused of something that's not true. I said, okay, grab your laptop. She said, why? I said, just get it out here. And she got the laptop out. I said, here's what I want you to do now. You can use only this finger. That's the only finger you have, and it has to do motions that are circular. And I'm going to say something, and I want you to take notes. Because she had sat there the whole class period going like this. No way, that's notes. She could have been searching for something, but she didn't say that. I was taking notes. So when I said, go ahead and take the notes. And then she said, okay, I will. And her screen come open. And it was Amazon. I said, okay, I think we're done here. So if you watch, you can get a sense. If somebody opens up their screen like this and they sit back like this, they jab their nape, they're watching videos. So sometimes you can tell. The tricky spot you got though is you might say something and they're going out to check and see what that really means or a related site, and they might be going 90 miles an hour, and then the next thing you know, they're on to a publication, and then they're into something else, and then they're into something else, and then they just get lost. They're just gone and lost. That happens a lot. They actually are meaning to learn, they're just lost. So it is a big problem. I think, I know the time's up now here, but we've got massive, massive educational challenges coming. I don't have easy answers for this. I know some faculty members will do tech-free times. Hey, everybody, I want all the technology put away. We're going to spend the next 10 minutes and we're just going to talk. And we're going to talk this through and work on it. I want you to turn your neighbors, whatever, tech-free. Be very careful about banning laptops, though. There are certain groups of individuals who actually do way better when they take notes on their laptops, especially people with ADD. If you take notes and you tell them no laptops, their scores start to plummet. So we're discriminating, so to speak, against those folks. So we do have to be careful of that. But the biggest issue is setting up a culture and trying to talk to them, but I can't give you a good answer to that one because we're going to fight the stuff that's out there, just like, and I always like to introduce something as we're finishing. We have a fight just getting students to show up for class, and we have to decide what is the real fight. Is it that their butts are in seats so I feel like they're listening to me? Is it because I know better than the world and I'm the only place they can get education from? Is it that they need a coach in the room in case they go off and learn something stupid? I can be there to help them. I mean, why exactly do we want the people in the room? And then how are we going to assess to make sure they're doing well? Because you're not going to make people sit in the rooms anymore. I think those days are gone. So we have to figure out, are they really learning it? And if they're not really learning it, we got to fix that part of it. But this is not going to be easy. So we've got some challenges coming, but we're educators. Teaching is the thing that makes all things possible, so we'll figure this one out. But we have to work at that. So, yeah. All right, we better stop because I'm being encroached upon.
That's exactly right. Thank you so much, Dr. Zakajczyk.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you all for coming and attending today and participating. Your questions and your talk, your discussion has been great. Please remember, October 24th is our Education Day, our annual Education Day sessions at 7 and noon, and the reception is in the evening at 5 o'clock with all of our teach awards and posters on display of research and scholarship related to teaching. So please join us then, October 24th. Have a wonderful